Welcome everyone to tonight's session on internal family systems, and we'll be exploring the realms of psychedelic preparation and integration. We've got Emma Diamond here tonight, and for those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Lani, and I'm the founder and director of Science of Life Psychology, which is an organisation that's been around for about 12 years now, and that has grown as I have, and expanding into different areas such as psychedelic trial protocol development and student placements, which support a range of services such as EGA and PRISM and the Australian Psychedelic Society, as well as the Mental Health Foundation. We also provide lots of training and therapy and group work programs. So before we open up this space with Emma, I'll just invite everyone to, if they feel that's okay, to close their eyes and just drop into this space together as we shake off the busy day and acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we all come from in Australia. And in this space, just connecting in, welcoming in all our parts that are here with us today. They're welcome, inviting us to explore the maps of consciousness and maps of incredible psychedelic plant kingdom. And as these medicines move rapidly around the globe, may we learn to really integrate the science and the sacred. Thank you. All right, Emma, would you like to introduce yourself before we launch into some questions?
Yeah. First of all, I want to say Ginagay from Gumbaynggirr country up in mid-north coast. I'm in Bellingen. And there was parts that come up about introducing myself. You know, who am I? How did I get here? And what do I say? But I suppose I'll start by saying I am a child, and I've got a master's in family therapy. So I come from a systemic family therapy practice and from working with children and families and dyadically. I've been working as a psychotherapist for 17 years. And I started my practice of therapy when I was living out in Alice Springs. So I felt very much like all of my theory and all of what I'd learned at university didn't really apply neatly to my clients that were from Aboriginal communities and Alice Springs town camps and working, cross-culturally with Indigenous populations. So I feel like I had to, in many ways, unlearn first from all the theories and the pathologizing models and understanding through a Western lens of mental health and mental wellness, and just sit and be with all of the Aboriginal women and children that I worked with, often outside, under a tree, in the dirt, country. Process of working, I worked out in Alice Springs for 7 years, and I worked in really complex trauma, a lot of domestic violence, family violence, a lot of very traumatized kids, and a lot of lateral violence, huge intergenerational trauma, systemic trauma, and of course the trauma of colonialism and land and being stolen. So there was just really, I feel like I started in the deep end in terms of understanding how to turn up therapeutically with hugely traumatized systems and connect and be safe enough. And as I think many of us can really respect that Indigenous ways of being are very ecologically and systemically orientated. That It's about all of our relations and being in right relationship. So somehow from starting out there, thinking and working systemically was the only way that I could work, and understanding that on a deep, not just in terms of family dynamics, but really considering all of the relationships and the histories that impacted and compounded my clients and their relationships. So being in the kind of deep end and really out of a comfort zone of Western therapy, I really had to apply myself to really trying to find ways of understanding how to at least turn up and be someone that they can be connected to, safe enough and present with. And eventually I found my way to IFS, internal family systems therapy, which really helped me to make sense of working internally and working intrapersonally, understanding the complexities of the human psyche. So since finding IFS, I think I did my first level 1 in 2017, and I have assisted in, I think, 6 level 1s or 7 level 1s. I've assisted in level 2s. I've done a lot of IFS training, and now I am a internal family systems therapist, certified therapist, and case consultant, which is what in America they say is a supervisor. So kind of very, very gradually over the last few years, my world has become all IFS. And parallel to that, I have had my own personal interest in psychedelics, and now a kind of professional interest in seeing how psychedelics and IFS overlap, can complement, can be cohesive in terms of supporting healing, really. So this is where I turn up here. Yeah.
Beautiful. And I resonate with the deep end. My very first job that I ever got when I graduated was working with DID victims of cults. And that was my very first caseload.
Yes.
When I was 23, and my biggest initiation, and set me up for life, really. And I wish I had IFS back then. It would have been easier on me, I think, from being able to know a bit more about self-energy, I think would have been, because it was heavy work, and we did really well. But I think the IFS framework is supporting me now on levels that I didn't really know were possible back then. So yeah. So before we get into the questions, I just have to briefly mention my signs of life disclaimer. Just, I guess, for anyone that's watching this webinar, we've got to be really mindful that obviously psychedelics are still largely illegal in Australia, and we're not encouraging people to go out and take them. That's a really personal choice, and please consult and get support and consider preparation and integration. But from the Signs of Life stance, we really are advocating for decriminalisation, and also multiple ways of doing medicine, as we see around the world in ceremony, clinical pathways, intentional recreational use, and also decriminalisation, but being really mindful of your legal setting and how that impacts you. And just honouring the complexities of freedom of consciousness and how it varies depending on where you are on the globe. Such a rich discussion, the right to a sovereign mind, and just acknowledging the work that ACT is doing to decriminalise small-scale psychedelic use in the near future. All right, let's launch into it. So the very first, and just keep this one brief, but if you could briefly describe the IFS model and how it can particularly support transpersonal realms and spiritual development.
So, internal family systems therapy is a very comprehensive psycho-spiritual model of human development. So I'll try and keep it brief. But I want to sort of put it down to some central tenets of the model, and particularly the ones that do cross over with psychedelics. So one of the central tenets of the model is that we all have the intrinsic capacity to heal our psyche. And in IFS, we name that intrinsic capacity to heal as self, our self energy. And I think many people who have experienced IFS therapy and psychedelics often share that the idea of a concrete sort of fixed self gives way to vivid complexity within, and a relational field from which emerges a true self, or an essence that's kind of also can be experienced in other expanded states, from deep meditation to communion with nature to breath work to trance and dance and drumming and shamanic practices. So it has this common thread of what is it to be in this state of self. And IFS therapy is really about facilitating a relationship between that self, which has qualities such as curiosity and compassion, courage, creativity, connectedness. We use a lot of C's in IFS to denote these qualities of what it is to be in self. And within the therapy, we facilitate, first of all, an experience of what it is to have a certain amount of this self energy on board, and then how to apply it to parts of us. How do we be with really intense or extreme parts of us with compassion? How do we connect with them? How do we give them signals of safety so we can understand what they are, why they're doing what they're doing, and how we can help them to relax or heal? So IFS is really about creating more and more connection inside. And with that connection comes different processes of healing and relaxing and harmony inside. It embraces cultural, ancestral, spiritual, meaning-making, ritualistic, ceremonial elements as a normal part of what it is to be human. So I think in this way, IFS is a really good, congruent therapeutic model to use with psychedelics, because there's this sort of openness to the sacred and the spiritual practices that innately come with psychedelic use, or noetic experiences. So essentially, internal family systems is a synthesis of two paradigms. One is multiplicity, that we all have multifacets or multiple parts within us, and systems thinking, which is, we've got many parts and they're all in relationship to each other, similar to an ecosystem. It's really about working with the relationships between self and parts and improving those relationships, and it kind of enhancing connection inside, that we can really open up our systems for healing. What informs our parts as human beings is what we have had to adapt to, what we've had to survive, how we've had to evolve, and what we kind of bring with us through our generations and our families and their legacies. And also what happens to us in our life, how we are burdened by certain experiences, particularly in our childhood. And if those are not supported in the right ways, or protected in the right ways, or met with love and compassion, how younger parts of us can be left with very heavy burdens that are often exiled into our subconscious and become, parts that we can't access because we're protected from them. Let me just see where I'm at. Probably a significant difference between IFS and a lot of other kind of medical model sort of ways of approaching mental health is that IFS is non-pathologizing. It's absolutely a type of therapy that can work with different diagnoses, but it is an incredibly accepting and non-judgmental, curious approach to the experience of individuals or of the clients that are in front of you. It also acknowledges that whatever part you're working with, that it somewhere in there, we assume that it has a positive intention, a reason for having to be the way it is, even if it is a part that has huge impacts on other people, on relationships, on your life. Somewhere in there, it has a positive intent. And another central tenet of the IFS way of working is that it is a constraint release model, which means that if we innately have a self inside, it's not something we have to develop or something we have to resource. It's really in helping the protective parts of us that have had to help us to survive learn that they can relax, learn that they can step back, learn that there is a self that can be present with the pain, the shame, the trauma inside. And then that constraint release creates more harmony. Yeah. Let me just check my notes here.
Oh,
there's lots of, what I wanted to say is there's enormous amounts of steps to the model of IFS. There's protocols, there's ways of working that people spend 2 residential weeks learning on the level 1. So it's not even, specialized treatments for certain presentations, but it's pretty complex to summarize it briefly. But if I can just mention that there's essentially 2 different types of parts. One are parts that have been working in a role to protect us. So they're caretakers, people pleasing. Oh my goodness, there's so many different types of protectors. Protectors that are very reactive or protectors that are very proactive. And we all have a protective system, a kind of layer of our psyche that's helped us navigate the world, perhaps achieve things, perhaps stay somewhat functioning whilst there's a lot of trauma in our system. So there's a layer, the protective layer of the psyche can have a lot of parts. And these parts can also get into a lot of conflict. So what the beauty of psychedelics and their potential is that psychedelics have the capacity to relax the protective system, the rigidity, the defensiveness, the fear inside, and help us access what is in IFS is called exiles, younger parts of us that need healing. Yeah, so there's the 2 layers. I think your question was also something about how it can help support spiritual development. Is that right? Yeah. So when the protective system can relax, when parts of us that feel like we're in fight or flight or freeze, or we have to like somewhat be something to prove ourselves or to gain, it could be anything, love, acceptance, belonging, and all those parts that can relax. What naturally comes is this self energy that then can sort of amplify or turn up and become a sense of connection to everything. A liminal space of love, a hope, and also open us to kind of layers of the human mind, that we can then feel very spiritually at one with everything. Yeah.
Well said. And we'll definitely, as the questions go on, the model will keep kind of revealing itself. And I'll also put some extra links and things in the mail out for everyone, because there's, as you said, there's so many protocols and processes for the model. What me and Melissa often say in our courses, particularly, we do a lot of courses for sexual trauma and PTSD and psychedelics, and is learning to integrate and learning to be in the right mind at the right time. So being able to choose, if you want to engage with your child parts or the teenager inside you, or, if you need to, call in the role of the mother or whatever it may be. And that leads to my next question. If we're kind of working to expand our self-energy and learn to have more communication and contact with our parts and get to know them, what are some really practical ways that people can start to have this relationship? Outside of therapy, I guess this work continues. As soon as therapy is over, it just begins. So, any practical tips on cultivating this relationship with parts?
Absolutely. So I would, and I know particularly for trauma survivors, this is a big thing, to pay attention to your body and its sensation. So how do we know we're in a part? Is usually it is expressed through sensation, thought, emotion, states, behaviors. So it's really, the first thing to do is to get curious, notice, I've got a lot of tension in my shoulders. My heart is pumping fast. I'm getting signals of feeling unsafe. I'm triggered. I'm very driven. I've got to do this thing. There's something pushing me. So getting to identify your parts, the first step is to do a U-turn, to notice what is happening in your body, and to notice what thoughts or commentary is happening, and to notice the felt state inside. So can I give an example of common parts that we can all work with? Most people have what I would call an inner critic, okay? A part that does frequently make comments about our performance, or why'd you do that, or that was stupid, or, usually they have a collective of one-liners, comments at them. Mine might say, yeah, you're stuffing this up. What do you think you're doing? You've gotten it all wrong. So that, we all have our own, I think, inner critics. Inner critics are usually parts that are up here. They're not necessarily in the body, but they may be more like in our ear, on our shoulder. And so getting to know your inner critic is actually, this is my co-therapist. A bit restless tonight. You going to come in? What are you doing? Probably chasing possums. Where was it? So when we have our inner critic, getting to know that is a really great thing for us to do, and something that we can all do. We can write down what its classic one-liners are. We can also notice what the impact on us is when we hear those messages. Usually, when we hear those messages from our inner critic, we're in a part that I'd call the criticized child. We're in a part that is bearing the brunt of that criticism. We might be in shame. We might feel smaller. We might feel burdened by the comments. So it can be very, very powerful to get to know both the part of us that is is impacted by our inner critic and our inner critic. There's also, a way to get curious as to what do I habitually do? What are my patterns? How do I respond, particularly with things like potential conflict? If I think there's some conflict in the air, what's my go-to? Do I people please? Do I appease someone? Do I puff up and become defensive? Do I have both parts in different circumstances? So really just I'd say, how do we start doing parts work is getting curious as to what our most obvious parts are, our frequent flyers. And doing a U-turn. So that's sort of like going inside, and it depends if you're a visual person or more a sensory person, sensing where that part is in your body or around you, seeing what it might look like. Externalizing it as well is a really great way of working with it. And then just going, well, there's my inner critic. It's monstrous. It often has huge power over me. How can I get to the right distance between it and myself so I don't feel so disempowered by it? So I can get curious about it and see why it feels like it has to constantly make a comment about my worth or performance. So that's a big one, naming an inner critic, but it's also one that most of us have. We also have caretakers, people pleasers, parts that are really good at running our to-do list and organizing us. Yeah. So that's my first thing. It's just getting curious about what are the most obvious parts of me. And then just noticing, how do I feel towards them? How do I feel towards that inner critic? Most of the time when you ask that question, another part comes up. I hate it. I wish I had more power over it. So a part that's either angry or rebels or stands up and defends you to it. So we start to, as we get to know our parts, start to see the patterns and systems and constellations of them. Yeah.
Beautiful. And just picking up on what you said about symbolizing parts, there's a lot of synergies with psychedelics in that space that people can, paint their parts. They can set up altars in their home with symbols and, different plants and ornaments and sand and clay, and you can actually give life to that part and then see what self-energy, see what parts show up when you approach it. You might sit with your altar that's representing that part, check in with it 10 minutes a day. There's some real magic that happens there when it becomes like a living piece of artwork. That I notice shame tends to dissolve really quickly once it's kind of out in the open, and working it from that, I guess, alchemical angle.
Yes, beautiful. So, I love that. I love the not just the externalizing, but actually an altar of really kind of like treating them as sacred, treating them as like, this also overlaps with sort of Jungian archetypal kind of work. Like so often our parts are quite archetypal, and to put them on an altar and sit with them and relate to them and connect to them and listen to them and respect them is all beautiful, transformative work. And once they relax, once of those more defensive, protective parts relax, then we can get to working with those other parts that are holding wounds. Yeah.
It can be a real pivotal moment, for myself, when the inner critic or I still get a little bit of imposter syndrome, so that keeps me, humbled. So I don't necessarily want to get rid of it, because it's a one to keep things nice and humble. But when it can be flipped into or turned into a inner cheerleader or an inner mentor, instead of energy that's tearing you down and looking for mistakes. It's like energy that's like, you can do this, you've got this, you've done it before, you'll find a way, and it really transforms the energy in your life if that's the inner chatter, as opposed to the critic. But very archetypal, one of the most common parts for sure.
And I want to add to your comment there. As we say in IFS, there are no bad paths. Somewhere in there, they all have good intention. Most of the time, our inner critics, if that's the example I'm going to roll with, they're almost shaming us inside so we don't get shamed on the outside. Trying to prevent us from really being humiliated. And they often, once they're connected to, or once you put them on the altar, you get to know them in a way, they don't necessarily like the job that they're doing or the impact that it's having. They're quite willing to, once they feel connected to, once they see that you're no longer maybe living in the family that you grew up in, or in the same circumstances that meant they had to work very hard, they will soften and they will take up another role and become more of like the cheerleader or a resource, or I can say that my part that it has imposter syndrome right now is doing a really great job of kind of motivating me to grow. I see its intention. It really wants me to do a job really well. And if I find myself out of my depth, it will fuel me to learn and grow until I get to a more comfortable place.
Beautiful. Does anyone have a question at this point? Question or comment before we move on to the next?
Yeah, Lani, I'm curious to know what the imposter part is. When you speak of imposter, Emma, what does that mean?
Well, I guess that it can be a very personal, I can only speak for myself really, but it's feeling, often when opportunities arise, feeling I'm not ready. Do I deserve this? Am I good enough? And I've lived my career largely in that zone of just being very out of my depths, but having to rise to the challenge. And but I guess now that I'm working with parts and IFS, instead of the fear and anxiety that can come with imposter syndrome, now it's more like, as Emma is saying, that okay, this is a huge opportunity to rise up and grow and seize that opportunity. So it's just a little bit of a spot on this is important, this is special opportunities, and keep growing and don't take it lightly. So that's just my interpretation of it. Yeah.
If I could add to that, and I know that's the thing about parts and IFS work, is that we can have archetypal or common parts, but how we experience them on the inside is really subjective, is really individual. So if I can feel my imposter part here, and I can see how it's really kind of like holding or somewhat connected to the part of me that doesn't feel good enough. And that's a younger part. And that's, I'm quite familiar with that part of me, and I know that little girl, and I love you. I love her. And, our relationship is one of our ongoing work. And I know she holds a legacy, especially a gendered legacy of, women are really, meant to stay small, not be given big power opportunities, or, so a lot of our parts have legacies that are not just ours. Yeah. Or they've been taught in the family they grew up to stay small. Don't step up into a place because that's unsafe. So it's a great question. And these parts, these sort of really common parts, are generally protective for underlying burdens or beliefs about the self or self-worth.
And I guess from a therapy perspective, Kit, it's knowing that these parts are deeply archetypal, and you can, educate clients on that and make reference to the larger cosmic, but not interpreting it for them, obviously. Like their subjective world needs to come forward without us putting, those words around it.
Yeah, and I was just going to mention a lot, the training I did with Gabor Mate and compassionate inquiry. It sounds like a lot of that's built on IFS.
Yes. Gabor Mate's work and IFS are really, really parallel and complementary. And I think Gabor Mate and Richard Schwartz are doing a PESI course together. Like it's very, very much these, I guess where therapy is landing now is in a far more compassionate space and a far more curious space around going beyond behavior and pathologizing and being with and connecting to suffering and our common experiences, the need for us to be in it together.
And the realization that you can't think your way out of trauma. Like it needs to be bottom up. It needs to be, the inner somatic experiences, symbols, myth, culture, phenomena. And this is where this is a synergy of psychedelics that can take people there very quickly. And I guess where many people with treatment resistant, I don't like that term, but that they haven't found the right treatment for them because it's been too cognitive. And years and years of going around in circles because their mind is being activated, but not their all these other subtle realms and archetypal realms. So it's an exciting time to be a practitioner, I think.
It totally is.
So the next question, unless there's any others before we move on. Good. So we talk about in psychedelics, we talk about setting, and also extend it to skills, metacognitive skills. But if someone is preparing for psychedelics, how can IFS help them understand their unique set? And when we say set, it's everything that you bring to the medicine, your personality, your history, any disorders, processes. So how can IFS help with that set?
So I've kind of thought about this in two parts. One is set for the guide or the facilitator, and set for the participant. Because I think that if we were conducting an IFS-informed psychedelic session, we would be asking the guide to ask themselves, how am I feeling today? What parts of me are up? What do they need to step back and give me permission to be in self? How am I feeling towards this participant? Is there anything in me that's coming up for them? Because what we know is if we've got a part that something in them reminds them, or we can sense a part of them that another part of us doesn't like, it can become a crowded space, an unclear field. So I feel like IFS is a really great tool to get guides into a clear field of self to be present with. And, in IFS, we would ask the guides to really get to know their parts and to get into self-leadership with their parts, so they can trust themselves to be able to turn up to whatever happens in that session. Because it isn't predictable, but to trust that they've got this. And it's really important that guides are aware of their own parts, lots of in traditional shamanic practices, they do their own cleansing and clearing and prayers and intention setting, and it's sort of woven into the practice. But I'm really curious as to kind of like more clinical protocols of working with psychedelics. How does it apply to the guides? It's also really important that in doing like thorough intake and an assessment, that the guides sort of know a lot about what supports are available outside, what post-session integration is coming up, and to get to know the client's protective system. What parts are rigid, scared, resistant, like can't surrender or let go, want to scramble or stay out of the body. So to really get to know those parts of the participant, because that's that's at some stage of the psychedelic experience, most likely that's going to come up, and just to be able to know what those parts of the client need in order to be able to relax. And there might be some specific reassurances, words, information that you can really just get directly from the part that they might need in order to really feel safe in the room with the guide. So yeah, I think it's a great tool to help in that setup, in assessing, getting to know, building rapport, helping the guide be in self, and helping that person feel like their whole system is understood. Yeah.
Something that just came to mind then was, I guess, what can happen with psychedelics, particularly some of the bigger ones, ayahuasca or 5-MeO, is that people might think that they've got a good understanding of their psyche, but there's parts buried, really deep down, angry parts, shameful parts, narcissistic parts that may not even be on their radar. And then if the medicine's really strong, rips up their protectors, open, into the cosmic mind, fragmented. What can happen, and I've seen happen, is people come back, and then that part that was only been a little bit of their present reality then takes over the system, and then firefighters are activated, maybe drinking that hasn't occurred in a decade.
Yeah.
And so the people then, rightly so, question the medicine. The medicine has caused me to feel anger or feel this deep shame, and it's caused me to relapse. And there's quite a complex discussion around all of that, but what it can do is psychedelics can rip open those protectors beyond what the person was aware of or planned for, or that the therapist was aware of, and it does leave them very vulnerable to then being in that part for a year or 2 years, unintegrated. But if there's more preparation done to map out, their map beforehand, including the firefighters, and what have been your historical, even if it's 10, 20 years ago, what did you do to put out fires? Because it could come up again.
Yeah, so that would be, like when you get flooded by exiled pain or shame, what's your go-to? What do you tend to do? It's a good question in the preparation session in order to prevent backlash. And I guess that's especially those DMT-based sort of plant medicines. So for people to really know that their deconstruction process of going beyond the protective system and into exiled material can bring up a lot of parts that have either been very managed and exiled, or really, really buried. And this is our plan. If that was to happen, this is our plan for integration. We will work with those parts. we will get to know their story. We will get you in relationship to them. There's so much that IFS offers in integration. It's, and in my personal, I have to say my personal work with psychedelics, it is a completely different experience to know that I get to go and integrate and work with and look at and for as long as needed. Super, super important. So I really wanted to say, like, in terms of the clients and their parts, to help the clients start to get curious about which parts of them are choosing to engage in psychedelic work, what parts are setting their intention and why. Because we can have parts that, we can have parts that really want magical healing, and set an intention that is really very agendaed and very wishful and very setting that person up for disappointment or like the roller coaster of false hope and crashing, So really getting curious about who's setting your intention. Which part? Is it a part setting it, or is it self? Is it self sense of what healing do I need? And what material do I want to focus on? Or is it a manager part that wants me to be a certain way? So it's really great to get the participant curious about, who's brought them here and why, and also to be curious, to help them be curious about, is there anyone inside that's not giving permission to this, that is scared, that has doubts, that needs to ask questions about the set or the guide or what's going to happen, that needs some psychoeducation, that needs to be seen and heard before all of this. So it's a beautiful tool to really do a thorough internal intake for the participant to get to know their landscape before they go deep diving. Yeah.
I really love what you've said about what part is setting the intention, and my mind's just gone on to a whole bunch of resources that I'm going to create now, because I think that's really powerful. And I'll give an example of some women that I've worked with. Theme, it's happened to many women where they're ready for love, they're ready to meet their partner, and then that's their intention in the medicine, and then they're told in the medicine, that they're going to fall in love, and so actually they're in a part, they're in a vulnerable part, a very needy, rightly so, needing connection part, but then that is amplified in the medicine and then amplified back onto them. And if there's not a lot of skill around, that it might be a trickster, it might be my own mind just being reflected back onto me, then it can be a real rabbit hole of disappointment, and people then get really angry at the medicine, the mother, ayahuasca, she lied to me, she told me so no, maybe that was you, maybe that was a part that's just being amplified in the medicine.
Absolutely.
It manifests in many different ways in the medicine, whether it's business, whether it's some variations.
Who's got the agenda here? And I think even in that example, Lani, so you could reflect back as a guide and say, there's a part of you that's longing and yearning for love. And how do you feel towards that part of you that yearns for love? And what does it need from you? And what does it need from this session, this psychedelic session? How does it want to be held? That can just, all of those questions just take it so much deeper.
And nearly 95% of the time when I ask that, it's they need to love themselves first. So they're chasing
the
something
external
that they haven't stabilized in themselves first.
So go inside is feeling unlovable. Yeah, it's such a neat, simple, great model to get to really do much safer set work. Less confusion, especially when the medicine tells you things. Yeah.
And I guess just in that, just be mindful of people who are approaching medicine. Is their intention even theirs? You know, I've worked with people who've been terminally ill, whose family has wanted them to do psilocybin, you know, and they've come to session and they don't actually, you know, they're facing death, but they're not ready to face psilocybin. And so just be mindful of the whole set process is, you know, is it you, or is it the voice of your partner or society, or you know, your community that's, you know, influencing you? You know, it really needs to come from within that kind of bit of self energy that says, you know, there was some clients have asked me, how will I know if I want to do it? I say, normally the body will tell you. Won't be your mind. You'll
normally it's like that full body yes. You know, or some kind of sense of a pull of a thread to, I want to do that.
Move towards.
Move towards that. Yeah.
Any questions, crew? Any of that?
I just also want to comment on what a wonderful concept this is, to ask the question, who is setting the intention? Which part of you is setting the intention? It's not a question that you would necessarily ask in any other paradigm, but there really is a distinction between setting an intention from one part compared to another. And it kind of reminds me of something which came up, Emma, in the IFS training. People were talking, I think Enat was talking about when you contract with people who are having suicidal impulses, and you contract with them not to self-harm, you know, over the next week or whatever it might be. The question that comes up is, which part are you contracting with? Are you contracting with the suicidal part or a people-pleasing part? Because if you're contracting with a people-pleasing part, the suicidal part doesn't have to abide by that. And there's sort of a parallel between these things. Which part is setting the intention? Which part are you contracting with? Which part are you in communication with? And I've heard previously that when setting intention, it's a good idea to try and set the intention as a curiosity. Be sort of within your intention, maybe have a curiosity to understand something better, because if you can do it from a place of curiosity, then you're more likely to be doing it from a place of self. So I'm wondering what you think about that as a concept for intention setting.
I think IFS, you know, as it guides you to go inside and do a U-turn and unblend from your path. So that's getting the parts that are present to step back. And then you can actually listen to the curiosity of self. What area of my life am I curious about growth in? What area do I want to know my patterns? Like, why is that set up like that? I'm curious. Like, I love that curiosity is the kind of like the thing that sends you down the wormhole to something deeper. Yeah, like and it often it does curiosity and more like an open curiosity rather than like that. I want to know why, but it can take us to like real truths inside of, you know what, I really got to, instead of I'm looking for love and I'm desperate for partnership, it's like I really got to work on my sense of worth. That's the area when I follow it down to the root, you know.
We often say in our courses it's about orientating your system towards, as opposed to what you don't have. Like I don't want to be depressed anymore. I want to move towards vitality. I'm curious about, lightness and ease and vitality. So I think it's a beautiful way of starting the journey, because then you're not starting it in deficit, and you're not starting it as the I need, I want.
Yeah.
But what if imagine if I expanded into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Yes.
Can I ask a question? I'm curious to know, is there an assessment tool that helps people find parts of themselves?
There's actually quite a few. I've got there's maps, you can map on the body, you can map like protectors and firefighters. Firefighters are the parts of us that are very reactive, that when we're flooded by our pain, come in to drink, self-harm, get suicidal, go shopping, whatever they do, eat, whatever they do to get away from the pain. So that's two different types of, but it would be I've got a couple of different maps that can be used to assess. Sometimes people, depends on, everyone's got a different way of experiencing parts. So actually drawing them is really great. Drawing a map, or I've got this critic here, and then I've got this shame here, and then I've got this rebel here, and I've got that you can do a whole bunch of maps as well. So you could do it really creatively. You can do it, I just love that flower mandala behind you, Lani. You could do it in nature. I have lots of rocks. I've got rocks all over my rocks that I've picked up from the beach, but I know what parts of me they're representing to me that I might be working with right now. So you can do it in a whole bunch of creative ways.
So to help people find parts of themselves, is it something that happens over the therapy? It's not something you do at the start?
It's something that happens over the therapy. There are some really great books where you can do IFS self-therapy, because I know therapy, and finding at the moment IFS therapists are really, hard to find someone who's got availability in most mental health areas right now. Or, there's a book called Self-Therapy by Jay Early that can start to work with parts. There are so many IFS resources on YouTube, and a lot of guided meditations that allow you to get to know your parts. There's
I've got a lot of because Kit's doing placement with me, Emma.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a lot of stuff I can show you on our Signs of Life. We've created a lot of resources, so you can start introducing this with clients from the very first discussion, because I talk about parts in the sense of transference, countertransference, potential for splitting, breaches in trust, shame, all of that, setting up the safety and the honesty. That's all parts language, and you can just gently introduce it and set up the framework, and also homework, like little parts meditations, brief ones, just to get them curious about it. There's lots of ways. I've really haven't found anyone that hasn't that has rejected the model, that if you can adapt it to each person in their own unique way. And some clients might not like the language of firefighter and exile, for some, I don't know, it just doesn't resonate. So you find their language, and you can work with it pretty early on, different ways.
Yeah.
So this is the next question I'm really fascinated about is, okay, how can and how do parts show up in dose sessions? And are there any harm reduction or just nuanced skills that can help people navigate parts, particularly in medicine, that fragments the mind?
Yeah.
Fragment.
So, it's kind of, I would say it's quite common that experiences of resistance, fear, avoidance, mental looping, tension or gripping in the body, confusion, what else would there be? Like
Pre-verbal.
yeah, pre-verbal, like sensations in the body, tears that are coming that you don't feel connected to. Like so much stuff comes up in a psychedelic journey. So is that what you're talking about when you say like parts that can come up in dosing sessions? Yeah. Yeah. And so they're all kind of, and it can be rapid because they can all come up very rapidly. And but it depends on the plant medicine and the dose. And
I might give an example and just put you on the spot and see.
go for
So
it.
imagine a client that is a human. Yeah, I'd much rather call them other things than clients. A person is experiencing multiplicity in the medicine, say psilocybin. They are cycling through episodic memory of trauma, of teenage parts, child parts.
Yeah.
But then the medicine is showing them, the archetype of the child being abused, the mother. You can get those multi-layered phenomena.
Yeah. Like the memories.
Yeah. So you've got the personal, transpersonal, post-personal, all happening at the same time. And that can be a lot, to come back from, a lot to integrate. So I guess, is there anything that could, in the prep phase, but also just in the dose, any skill that someone could have or any tool that could help navigate those multi-layered fragmentations, really, multi-layered parts?
Yeah. And it's not like you can slow it down. Yeah. So it's just coming at you. So, I would probably either in the setup, really, but also through the dosing session, use particular words that will remind them of love and compassion and courage, and also to be with instead of in what is coming up. Just be with, just watch it, up it comes, because it's all happening too rapidly to engage with it. Yeah. So I would sort of try and come up with some keywords that resonate with them. But for me, it would be those simple reminders of just to breathe in courage, to be with compassion and love, and to invite those qualities in while this bombardment is happening. And also maybe to inhabit parts of the body that are a little more spacious, to kind of, or that bring them a sense of strength and groundedness or support. Like sometimes it's just lean into your back, into your spine, breathe into it, sit up. All of those kind of like, it's not that we're resourcing them from the outside, it's they're finding the resources inside and reminding them of those resources inside. But they can also call on other inner resources such as guides or ancestors or elements or totems, or, like to really have like a kind of resource kit inside to remind them that it's there while all of this material's coming up, and let them know, I guess, that, it's like we go through this, it will be over and we will integrate it. Just, whilst they're at the kind of crux point. And I think these are all domains that IFS really embrace as good sort of self-enhancing inner resources, that we're not alone. There is a bigger vessel that's holding us. And there's lots of elements to that bigger vessel, depending on where they're at spiritually, where they're at with their connection to ancestry, where they're at with their connection to nature. Does that answer your question, Lani?
It does, and I'll add, my ayahuasca talks about the 5 gates, and it's there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. You will not die, assuming that the container is safe and appropriate contraindicators are being screened, but typically very safe. And at the end of it all, like in the IFS model, there's no bad parts. With medicine, you know, there's a thread there. There's something in that medicine that there's light, there's love, even if it was very dark, very harrowing, very painful, just like parts. You got to look for that thread and get very curious about that thread.
And there's this really, you know, I think the focus really of IFS therapy is more trust and more love. More trust and more love. The more self there is, the more love, the more trust. And I feel like with psychedelic experience, that is that emphasis of relaxing fear and allowing more love, trusting the process, knowing that there's a beginning, middle, and end. All of that is similar themes to it all.
And what I found, and this ties in with metacognitive skills, so, you know, having the capacity to track your thoughts and feelings and sensations, consider your mind as well as the other minds in the room and then the larger mind, being able to hold multiplicity and be curious and not rush to conclusions or fixed notions of truth. And this all fits with metacognitive skills as well as IFS. What I found for me personally is when you sharpen these skills, then in those larger psychedelic landscapes, you can be more of an observer, as opposed to just being like, you're absolutely demolished and blended with the medicine, and, you know, no wriggle room to kind of move around and have choice and orientate. So I can't advocate enough for other complementary therapies that really sharpen that insight, because then it transfers over into altered states. You get to really see it played out in a much larger, challenging arena.
Yes.
But it's very cool when it lands.
Yeah, absolutely. I did have something that I wanted to add. You've asked me the questions, I'll come back to it.
That's all right. We've got 10 minutes, and I just wanted, you've touched on this a little bit, but how does IFS work with legacy and lineage unburdening?
Yeah.
How is this synergistic with psychedelics?
So there's a whole protocol in IFS around working with legacy material, and we absolutely recognize that there's certain parts of us that carry belief systems and ways of surviving and ways of being that come directly from our ancestry, from what our grandparents or our parents or beyond that has had to survive. I have Ashkenazi Jewish roots. My ancestry are multiple genocidal, you know, so I have had to really work with the depth of pain and suffering and loss that comes with that legacy inside my own system, even though it didn't happen to me or my parents, but it was intergenerational, and it is a really important piece of IFS work, is how do we work with intergenerational trauma, because we carry it in our beings, and there are parts of us that are holding those burdens, you know, and there's many generations before our generations that didn't have access to these medicines or therapy, or even their generations back, traditional ways of being to process loss and grief. I mean, the Western world is pretty crap at grief and loss, basically, you know, so there's a lot of, like, often we're holding the grief of our parents or our grandparents, or so within IFS is absolutely an honoring. I find some of the biggest shifts in my system that I've done with IFS is through legacy work. And I've done legacy work with IFS and in psychedelics. and it's been so beautiful and complementary and sacred. And I really love that when we do work with our legacies, our ancestry can become gifts. We can also claim qualities and heirlooms from our ancestry that can become resources even in our psychedelic experiences and in our world. Yeah, so I love that stuff. I feel like I could talk about it for a long time.
A
But
word,
yeah,
a word of caution, though, I guess, it's my favorite part of IFS and also one of my favorite parts of the medicine. But it for people who are new to these spaces may not even really be conscious of their own lineage that they're carrying or not really tapped in consciously. It can be a rude awakening when you get dropped into those spaces, particularly if you've been focused on you and your story, and then you're opened up to, the archetype of, all of, humankind suffering. It's that's where people can come a little bit undone. And for me, at one stage, because I did some human trafficking projects in India and the Philippines, and when I was much younger, and didn't really realize the enormity of the pain body that I was moving around, one of the biggest human trafficking hubs in the world. And, I was there as an advocate and huge feminist mission. So I collected all this trauma around me, but didn't feel it. And one ayahuasca journey, like 10 years later, I got dropped into basically the realm of all the missing women and children, that were lost, that had been taken. And for 8 hours, I was just, pinned to the wall, just, and it was actually an incredible gift in the sense I was able to actually then retrospectively feel what I needed to feel. That I didn't feel at that time, but I was lucky. I had a lot of skill and love of life and love of, even love of trauma and the gifts of trauma to be able to move through that. But if you don't have an awareness of that, it can be really big. These large medicines.
Yeah. A really, really good point. And the one of the other tenets of IFS is not only are we multiple, but we're porous. Which is, I think, what you're talking to is that we carry our legacies, but we can be porous to, and I know for me, some psychedelic sessions have been around letting go of what I'm holding that's not mine. From my work, I worked a lot in sexual abuse and domestic violence as well, that parts of us can really take on things that don't belong to us. And that porousness is something to consider in psychedelics. And to know that you also have, I think, to know that you have a choice about that porousness, that there is ways to protect, keep safe from things that are not you coming in. And that porousness is definitely considered in IFS therapy as well. And it kind of crosses over with the shamanic, which is, in our Western culture, not something that we're meant to kind of suggest that we also have elements of in our therapy. But, I think that's where psychedelics cross over as well into Indigenous ways of being and shamanic practices. And they're very, very wise when it comes to porousness. Yeah.
That we're all inherently medicine carriers of our own unique medicine. And I guess that's through IFS, when people become more and more in self energy, then they step into their medicines, through work, through art, through relationship. Same with psychedelics. If you get the right support and the right container, you end up coming into self energy, and then you end up doing, projects and adventures that you never thought were possible. The amount of people whose voices are activated in ceremony, just out of the, never sung before, and then comes out, and that's self just going, right, I'm here. So yeah, beautiful. Well, we're finishing up.
Out at the last minute.
I could talk for hours and hours on this stuff. Any last minute questions, guys, before we wrap it up for tonight? I'm losing Emma a bit.
No questions, but yeah, I just want to say this is wonderful and fantastic, and I love this work, and yeah, I'd love to integrate that into my work practice too.
I'm sorry, I just dropped out at the last minute.
No, I just said it was wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, pleasure. Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation, and I feel like there's a lot more to be talked about and unpacked, and there's a lot of potential of that sort of coming together of IFS and psychedelics in a way that I feel is really important, you know, like in keeping safe. And I just want to say one last thing, which is because when people are on plant medicine, they're so vulnerable and so open to suggestibility and power dynamics. And, you know, the model of IFS in terms of applying it to the guide is so helpful, because we all have blind spots. And the more we can be constantly curious about what's coming up in us, as a therapist, a guide, anyone that is in a powerful position of potentially offering healing, it's super important. And can I finish with a quote that I'm trying to live by? Sometimes well, sometimes not well. It is a rare gift to find someone who can help by not being too helpful, who can facilitate by not getting in the way, who can be involved without mixing up his needs with ours, who can be a midwife for transformation without taking credit away.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
Doing by not doing, you know, the gifts of that. Yeah. Well, thank you, and just want to acknowledge all your hard work and all the self energy that goes into being you and the work that you're doing, and really look forward to hopefully more collaborations and getting to know each other more and growing this space. And yeah, that was just exquisite. Thank you.
I was really enjoying it, and I wish you all well in your endeavors of understanding how to work towards healing and transformation and plants, and so juicy. We're so
Plants
lucky.
and parts.
Plants and parts. It's a good path to be on. Okay.
Awesome, everyone. And I'll send this link out with some bits and pieces over the next week as well.
Beautiful.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.